Welcome back to 5 Miles Easy with me, Rose Harvey.
And me, Steph McCall. She's an Olympian.
And she's an elite ultra runner, so you might think we have this running thing pretty figured out.
We absolutely don't, but we're on a mission to become better runners.
And we're bringing you along for the journey.
So let's lace up for 5 Miles Easy.
Steph, this week we're talking about a topic that is very close to our hearts and a muscle which arguably is the most important one when running. Not one in your legs, strangely, our brains.
Ooh.
Mindset. We talk about this a lot, but today we have a fantastic expert on, and I cannot wait to share this conversation because runners, at whatever level you are, we've all been there when we've done the training in great shape and it's our mindset that lets us down on the day. And I think it's something that is so undertrained.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we put the question out to our Instagram followers and the response that we got there, clearly a lot of people want help with this. And I think, you're not alone if you think that your mind is letting you down, say, in a race when you think you've trained amazingly. So, yes, we have Dr Josie Perry on, and she is incredibly knowledgeable about this topic, so we cannot wait to share it.
Yes, she has worked with runners of all ability, actually, from novice up to world champions. She's worked in 24 different sports as well and written 5 fantastic books, which I first heard about Dr. Josie Perry from her book, so I would highly recommend that, 10 Pillars of Success. But without further ado, shall we get Josie on the sofa?
Let's do it. Josie, thank you so much for joining us for 5 Miles Easy. Rose and I are so excited to have this chat because we talk so much about mindset and how us just working on that has really helped our performance, both in training and racing. So we love talking to real experts about it as well. But the first question that we ask all our guests is, what is your why when it comes to running?
That's really tricky because I ask all the athletes I work with for their why. One of the things we talk about is motivation and fun in sport, right? And I talk about type 1 fun and type 2 fun. So type 1 fun is when you love it in the moment and you're lost in the flow of that movement of running. And type 2 fun is where you probably hate it in the moment, but you're really proud you did it afterwards. And I'm definitely a type 2 runner. I do not run naturally. I don't love running, but I love being a runner, if that makes sense. So probably my why is more so I can do triathlon. To me, it's the hardest bit of triathlon. I'm happy swimming, I'm happy on the bike, and then it's like, I have to see how few people I can get to overtake me on that final bit. So I do it because it's a necessary evil, but I also love the feeling that I've done it afterwards.
The sense of accomplishment.
Yes. Yeah, I love being able to tick off stuff. I try not to use too much data because I find that's not always actually helpful and that sucks a lot of the joy out of running. And I love big races. So big races, when you're surrounded by other people who are also doing something that they enjoy, is amazing. I love that atmosphere. But yeah, the actual running bit, I probably don't love as much as you two.
So do you get the type 1 fun from swimming and cycling?
Yeah. Like
you enjoy being in the
occasionally,
moment.
when you're swimming and the feeling of going through the water. Because sometimes it feels like you're like swimming through treacle and you're like, this is not working. But sometimes it just feels like you're almost part of the water.
I wish I could feel it. I'm laughing because I did London Marathon and now I'm building up my training and I'm doing a bit less mileage. So I'm trying to do some swimming to kind of make it up. And I am the opposite to you. I have that type 1 fun running, but I have to drag myself to the pool, kicking and screaming. And I feel like I'm a lawnmower in the water. Like I am battling the water the whole way through. And however hard I try, I feel like the harder I try, the worse I get.
And I was exactly the same until I tore my calf last summer. So I was building up my running massively, was really enjoying it. I got a coach. I was like, right, I'm going to take this more seriously. And then I tore my calf muscle and it was like 8 weeks off running. And I'm very lucky. I'm at a gym that's got an outdoor swimming pool. And so I was like, fine, I'll just swim 4 times a week for 8 weeks until I can get back running. And when you swim regularly, something clicks. And I ended up taking 5 minutes off my 1,500 metre swim time.
Wow.
Yeah, just by swimming. And I've been doing it for 10 months now. Regularly swimming 4 times a week for 10 months makes a massive difference.
Well, I guess it's the same as running,
it's the
isn't
same
it?
as
If
running,
you just
it's
continuously,
consistency. It works.
Yeah. And on the topic of mindset, so when you're doing a triathlon and you enjoy the swimming and the cycling, do you have to like change your mindset? What do you do with your brain when it gets to the run so that you stay? Is that your technique?
So, yeah, I did Windsor Triathlon yesterday. So the swim, and it was a downstream swim. It was so fast. It was amazing. Wow. So you come out the swim, look at your watch going, I'm a superhero, even though you're not, because it was the current. Bike was beautiful, super fast. And then it's like, okay, I think I'm in about 6th. Now let's see how few people will overtake me. So it's purely like I'm trying to keep ahead of people and you're being chased down. And it's like, if I stop and walk, that's another girl that's going to overtake me. So it's just, how do I stay as much ahead as I can and as few as people as possible overtake? So there's no enjoyment in that bit. It's just get to the end.
But that's so interesting, because this is a thing, we actually put a question box out to our listeners, which we will get into all of their struggles later in the episode. But a really common thing is giving up when it gets hard. And what I'm hearing there is you've accepted that it feels hard and it might not be enjoyable. And it's not like you're seeking that enjoyment. You've accepted it's not there, and you found a way to just think, I'm going to find a different way to keep myself going.
So my whole psychological approach is based on what's called acceptance. So the approach I use is called acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's the idea that we're not trying to get rid of discomfort, and we're not trying to get rid of the fears and the worries we have. Because one of my athletes described it as whack-a-mole. So it's like you might be able to focus on a specific fear or worry you have and you whack it down, but another one's just going to pop up round the corner. So better to have an approach that helps you deal with worries and fears than deal with individual things. So the idea being you accept that there are going to be hardships and that there's going to be discomfort and things will be hard, but you do it in the service of your values. So I have an 8-year-old daughter. It matters to me that she doesn't quit when things get tough. It's like, if I can role model just one thing to her, it's that if she set a goal, she works really hard towards it. And so she was at the race yesterday. She's my biggest cheerleader. She does gymnastics, cartwheels and walkovers by the side of the road to cheer me on. So how can I not take it seriously? Or how can I drop out knowing that she's watching that and that I'm giving her a bad message? I'm not role modelling the mum that I want to be to her. So it's much easier, rather than going, I don't want to do this, to go, I need to do this because I need to teach her that message. It's going to hurt. And often a phrase we use with athletes is lean into the discomfort. In fact, I interviewed Eilish McColgan before London for a corporate project, and she talked about her mantra being stay. And I love that, because lots of people have a mantra to push themselves, but she pushes herself so much. She doesn't need to push any harder. She's already gone out probably right at the level of her capacity. She just wants to hang on as long as possible. And so I really love that about you lean into the fact that this is difficult and you might not enjoy it, but you're going to do it anyway in the service of what matters to you.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So if we just take a step back, can you actually just tell us what you do and how you got into being a psychologist?
I guess I got into it because I was working for a big health organisation, health charity, and we owned lots of gyms and hospitals. And my fun bit on the side was doing Ironman racing. And so I'd done all my swim training in London gyms, which are about 20 metres long and very chlorinated and very safe. And my husband and I went over to Melbourne to do the Melbourne Ironman. And I was standing on the beach at Frankston, where it starts, and the waves were utterly terrifying. Like, even Aussie husband was looking quite scared at this point. And the guy on the tannoy said, you can't control those waves. You can control how you feel about them. All my years of running and triathlon, I'd never actually thought about using my brain. It'd always just been kind of a, what does your body do? My body's not particularly well designed for sport. I have scoliosis, so I have a very twisted spine that means my body breaks quite easily. So I was never actually designed for sport. But hearing those messages was like, if I used my brain a bit differently, maybe I could be more successful. And it worked enough to get me in the water. And I did my fastest ever Ironman time that day. And I came back to the UK afterwards, and I wasn't happy in my job. And I was just like, how do I examine this? How do I delve into it more? What would I want to know? And I started researching sports psychology. And there was Steve Peters about the time, who's the most famous sports psychologist who isn't a sports psychologist, who's actually a sports psychiatrist. So there was lots of stuff around the chimp paradox. There wasn't really anything else. And I was like, I want to know more about this. So I quit my job. I went to do a conversion course in psychology. I then discovered you had to do a year's master's in sport and exercise psychology. Only then did I discover you have to do another 3 years of kind of supervised practice where you're allowed to work, but you have to have a supervisor and you have to be very closely kind of monitored as to what you're doing. And I was already down that journey, so I was like, fine, I'll carry on. So I qualified properly, fully, in 2018. So I run a private practice based in London, but I see lots of people online where at least half my work is one-to-one work with athletes across any sport. But obviously I have a soft spot for runners and triathletes. But I will work across any sport, mainly individual sports. And I specialise in helping those who've got high levels of performance anxiety. So they're either getting really anxious before races, or they're having that kind of flipping the lid mid-race of like, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm stopping. Or increasingly working with athletes who have ADHD. And I've recently written a book on ADHD in sport. So that's helped to have lots of tactics and tools that will help that group of athletes. And then I also do lots of workshops and speeches. And then I do some corporate work with organisations helping to translate sports psychology into real world, kind of how we can use that in all areas of performance. And then I also write books. So ADHD in Sport was my 6th book.
It is also, like you mentioned about business there, but it is also linked. And Steph and I both have had a lot of sports psychology help. You know, we went there for running, but we've both found it translates so much into our everyday lives. And it is incredible. It completely changes the way you think.
I did a really lovely workshop with Wimbledon Hercules athletes last week, and I put all this stuff out that I used before. So there's like a booklet that they can follow along and some confidence boosters and some little cards for how to calm yourself down if you get anxious. And I just overheard 2 of the boys looking at them going, well, this would work for life.
Yeah.
I was like, yes, I've done it. But then they're thinking, and I spend most of May, actually, the junior athletes I work with, we're working on how they're going to deal with their GCSEs and their A-levels, because all of the tools we use in sports psychology work in any area where you're trying to get high performance.
And I don't just stress, right? Exams are stress, racing is stress. It's all.
Well, I put it down to threat. So I talk about the way the brain, 3 key functions of the brain be your habit functions, your logic decision-making functions, and your threat system. And most of the problems that show up in sport show up because our threat system is overwhelmed, either because there's a physical threat, which is quite rare in most of our sports, but there's going to be a lot of psychological threats, like I'm not good enough, I might fail, I might be judged, I might be talked about, I might lose my sponsorship, all of those. And then the physiological threats of this hurts, I've pushed myself too much, or my knee's playing up and I'm worried I won't be able to do my race. So almost everything I'm working on comes down to threat. And that is the same whether you're a runner or you're an opera singer. I work a lot with CEOs who've got kind of threats within their organisations or their own threats of like, how do I be good enough to run this? I work a lot with wine tasters, because if you are in wine tasting, the world of being a sommelier, there is one qualification that means you're pretty much going to be able to get any job in the world, and it's the Master Sommelier exam. And only 271 people have ever passed it.
Wow.
Right? So if you're going into an exam where there's about a 90% failure rate, your threat system's going to be super triggered.
Yeah.
And when your threat system is triggered, 2 of the signs of it is that you lose your sense of smell and your sense of taste.
Oh, wow.
And they're the 2 things you need to pass the exam.
Interesting.
So I work a lot in that world. Similarly, I work a lot with helicopter pilots trying to pass their exams, or police high-speed drivers. Some of those exams are brutal and they last for 2 weeks, those exams, right? So every single day, they're filtering out the people that aren't going to pass. So you're going into an exam every day where you're being assessed by somebody and you have somebody else sitting in the back seat who's also trying to pass, where you have to be 100% on it. And you're doing something that's incredibly dangerous. You're 130 kilometres down a motorway. Yeah. So you need to be in control of your threat system massively.
How do you control your threat system? Because it's such a primitive thing, right? It kind of goes back to evolution of our brain doesn't know when we're racing that we're not being chased by a lion and we're about to die.
Yeah.
So how do we control it?
I tend to use 3 elements to it. So the first is when you notice what's happening, and a lot of the work I do is around kind of the awareness of our brain and what it does to us and why. So when you notice your threat system is rising, we will do breathing techniques and we'll do grounding techniques to be able to pull you back to the moment. And the phrase we use a lot in running is be where your feet are. Everything is about being where your feet are, because your threat system, if it's psychological threat, it's triggered by outcomes. Yeah. And specifically what that outcome means about you as a person. So I don't get too upset when I run badly because I don't see myself as a runner. I would get upset more if I did triathlon badly because I see myself as a triathlete. And I get upset if I if I parent badly, because I see myself hopefully as a good mum. But if you see yourself as a runner, that's your identity, and you run badly, or you're judged as running badly because the time that you got didn't match the time that you'd set in your head as your expectation, it feels horrendous and your threat system's going to massively trigger. So we're constantly looking at kind of moving away from outcomes and being in the moment where your feet are. So we do some physical work around breathing, because hopefully now, if you were to check your Garmin's, you've got matching ones, that's really sweet. So cute.
I think they look quite similar, to be fair.
So if you were to check those, your respiratory rate's probably around 13 or 14 breaths a minute. If a bear was to run through that door, they'd go up to about 20, 22. And when our respiratory rate gets really fast, we don't breathe properly, we just fill the top of our lungs. So actually, we're not getting good quality oxygen anyway. So what we would do is do a breathing exercise to get your breaths down to about 5 or 6 a minute. When you do that, your threat system stops going, oh, there's something wrong. Because the physiological element of your threat system, when you're breathing super fast, makes it realise there's something wrong, and it sends more adrenaline and cortisol around your body, and you constantly get that feeding in, which is really unhelpful. So that's why we work on slowing down the breathing, because it physically stops your brain overreacting. And we focus on senses to ground ourselves, because if we switch our senses back on, we are less feeling overwhelmed. We're able to come back into the room. So our first bit is always breathing and grounding to get back to where our feet are.
How would that work in a race environment when you can still slow down your breathing, but you're going to be breathing hard anyway? And sometimes I find focusing on my breath is a bit distracting and almost makes me panic a bit, because I feel then like I'm breathing even harder. So would you still recommend that in a race, or is there anything else that you work on?
So in a race, no. We would definitely do it on the start line though. So you're standing on a start line and you look over and suddenly your brain's gone to, they all look so much fitter than me. They're all really faster. Oh, I'm ranked number 3. What if I come number 4 or number 5? And your brain's gone off down some little alleyway of despair and real difficulties. That's the time to do those breathing techniques. In the race itself, it might be much more grounding. So I would suggest things like the rainbow technique. As you're running, you look around to find something that's red, something that's orange, something that's yellow. Because it's a distraction, but it also helps switch your brain back on. And often I'll be like, the fact you're breathing fast means you're working hard. Well, you want to work hard. That's why you're there. So again, it's that lean in to what you're doing. And sometimes you can reframe it. There's a lovely quote from Sir Chris Hoy, because he used to get incredibly anxious before his track races, like to the point where he had to be put on his bike. And he worked with Steve Peters to really try and reframe what he was feeling. And the feeling of anxiousness is also the feeling of excitement. It's just the way our brain translates that feeling. So he used to say out loud, I am not anxious, I'm adrenalized. You need adrenaline to race 4 minutes incredibly fast around a track. It works. So often it's that telling yourself, God, I'm feeling awful right now. That's a good thing. I wanted to feel like I'm pushing it. I want to feel like this is hard work. I'm here for the hard work. It's adrenaline flooding my body. That's a good thing. Yeah. Adrenaline helps us. The cortisol, not so much, but the adrenaline helps us. And if you can focus on the adrenaline bit, you're like, brilliant, right, let's just use this to get to that next lamppost or to get to that next kilometre marker.
Yeah, so fascinating. And actually the breathing one you're saying before the race, that's something I've implemented, because I had a period of time where I really struggled psychologically in racing. Not so much in training, it's just when it came to racing, and actually the breathing technique on the start line was a huge thing for me to just be present, and it helped massively. And I think that links into what you were saying about process versus outcome, which is something that Rose and I talk about a lot in terms of focusing on that process rather than the outcome. And that's one of the pillars in one of the books that you've got, the 10 Pillars of Success, which seems so fascinating and incredibly interesting and helpful. I guess when you're working with an athlete and talking about what success means for them, I guess there's a range of answers, whether that's breaking a PB or just finishing a hard race. How do you work with them to define what success is?
That's really hard, because obviously I only work with the athletes that come to me because there's some kind of issue going on. So if you were working, it's probably a bit different with running, but maybe you're working for British Athletics and you've got all the runners there. Most of them probably aren't having any specific psychological issues. So you can teach lots of mental skills. And as part of that, you might be talking about success. If If you're coming to me, it's usually because you've got really high levels of performance anxiety or you've lost your motivation. And then success might well not be the best version of success that's going to help you. So it does tend to be very, very outcome driven. And often the people with high levels of performance anxiety, actually pretty much always, also have very, very high levels of perfectionism. They're usually highly intelligent and perfectionistic. So their brain is often overthinking everything because they're trying to predict what might happen. And they're perfectionistic, which means they are never going to reach whatever they have defined as success. And even if they did, they would just redefine success. So I remember interviewing an Olympic athlete, Olympic gold medalist in their sport. And I was like, he was a perfectionist. Like, how long did the joy of winning the medal last? About 4 hours. Then they were trying to work out how they won it back in 4 years later, right? And that's the harsh bit of you don't always... they won't know until they're older and looking back on it what success was. And often I will work with people who are older and they were like, actually, I was really successful as a kid. I just didn't realise because I was always trying to get to that next level. And that's good in a way because it means you work so hard, but it also means you don't enjoy the process along the way and you don't realise how good you are and you don't then feed that back into the work you're doing. So when I'm working with an athlete, particularly a perfectionistic athlete, we will stop looking at outcomes and we'll look at inputs. And that's really hard as a sports psych to say to someone, stop trying to win, because you can't control winning. You don't know who else is on that start line. You can control all the inputs you put into your race. And we break them down. So we have 10 inputs. They can be anything they want, but they have to be things they're in control of, because then they can measure their race afterwards by whether they followed their inputs.
Can you give us some examples of what those would be?
So it might be the pre-race routine that they do. It might be what they eat beforehand, because often a lot of athletes will struggle with eating properly beforehand because their stomach's all tensed up from the worry. It might well be how they break down their race. So an 800 metre runner, we might have four chunks, and they would have a different task for each of those chunks. It might be a mindset way that they are. I remember doing one of the Battersea run-through races before Christmas, and I was standing at the start thinking, I'm just going to take this easy. I can't really be bothered. It's been a long day. And I was definitely dumbing it down in my head of how hard I was going to work. And I saw one of the athletes I work with in front of me who had been through a horrible time, and they were still there at this start line. And it was such a light bulb moment of like, okay, if they're here, I can't pathetically do this. And so my pure input for that race was discomfort. I was like, I want to feel like I need my asthma inhaler. I want to be in discomfort for these 5 kilometres because I want to feel proud of the fact that I've pushed myself. I don't want to cross the finish line and think, oh, I could have done better. I had a really, really great race because the input was all about pushing and discomfort. It wasn't about enjoying it, and it wasn't about I want to get a new PB or I want to do X time. So often you feel so much prouder when you've crossed the finish line with the input. And so many, particularly marathon runners, because no one has a nice marathon, right?
Yeah, like, they hurt.
They hurt, right? You're out there for a really, really long time. So there's going to be down moments. Your circadian rhythm in itself means everybody's out there for at least 90 minutes. You're going to have some down moments in it, which means you almost have to embrace those bits. And if you embrace those bits because you purposely wanted to embrace them, and that's your input, and you've got tasks to focus on, the outcome becomes irrelevant. When the outcome is irrelevant, there's no threat because you're not measuring yourself about the time or a place that you become, which means your body relaxes, you have far less tension, you don't have the stomach upsets in the same way, your heart rate drops, so you can push yourself more, and you tend to perform so much better. But it's really hard to say to athletes, please stop trying to win, because if you stop trying to win and start trying to focus on what you put into the race, you will do a lot better.
It's like controlling the controllables, isn't it? Because what you're saying there is actually you're focusing on your performance and all those elements which make a brilliant performance, and just stripping out all those things you can't control about how everyone else does and the conditions and like everything else that goes on race day. I
love watching social media the week before London because everyone's focused on the weather.
Yes.
And it's like, there is nothing you can do about that.
Everyone's running in the same conditions.
You've all got the same conditions. You can change your kit and make sure your kit is suitable for the weather. You make change your race plan a little bit if you're going to stop for more water or you have more gels, but you can't do anything about the weather. And yet that's what everybody chooses to focus on because it's an easy topic.
Yeah. And then people are worried they're going to run slower because it's hot, but okay, you might. And that's okay because you can't do anything about that. Focus on something else that you can do.
With athletes, we'll literally do 3 lines. These are the things I can control. This is what I might be able to influence. And actually in running, there's very little we can influence. These are things I cannot control. And we do it so bluntly so that every time there is something they can't control, it's like, you can't control that. What can you control? And sometimes, particularly if I'm working with juniors, I'll train the parents into, when they focus on this, what can they control? And it's always pulling it back to what's in your control. So you can do something about that.
It's interesting that you said people go to you when they've got a problem, because I started seeing a sports psychologist, not really because I had anything particular I wanted to work on, but it was when I got my first injury. And it was more that I was like, well, I can't run, but let's think about all the other elements that go into my training. And if I can improve every single thing of the other things that go into training, well, I'm going to come out better. Amazing. Even though I can't run for 2 months or whatever. And so one of them was my psychology. And I didn't have anything that I was like, oh my gosh, this lets me down every single time. But there's always things you can improve, right? And
yes,
there were so many things when I sat down and thought about it. I was like, right, this is the whole list of things that I think I can improve my mindset on. And that was why I started seeing sports psychologist. And years later, I'm still getting help because there are still things I need help with, and it's just this continual process. But
you sound like a dream client. Yes, and I will get, if I'm working with a junior, a parent will contact and say, can you work with them on not necessarily things that are wrong, but like, we know they want to go pro eventually, and we thought it would be helpful for them to learn these tools as young as possible. I'm like, amazing. And then they'll come back and go, oh no, they've got injured. Shall we put it off until they're back up running or training again? I'm like, no, this is the time. Like, if you've got a couple of months out from doing the thing you love, your dopamine's going to be low. We need to find some good ways for you to keep up to speed with that so that you don't get too down. And we've got loads of time to work on all of the different tools so that when you are back up and running again, you've got all the tools in your toolkit. So being injured is actually a perfect time to do sports psych.
Do you find working with young athletes, is that important for their long-term career? So actually implementing those tools and techniques at a younger age will help them so much when they're an adult as well?
Totally. I mean, for some of them, it keeps them in sport.
Okay.
And that's what's really important. I meet, particularly in tennis, I meet so many adults who were phenomenally good at things like tennis until about 16, and the pressure and the stress and the expectations got too much and they quit. And they get back into it at like 30 or 40 for the social side, and then they get they're good, obviously, they get pressured to join, I don't know, the club tennis ladder and all the internal competitions, and then they start to notice some of these old feelings coming back, and they don't want to be beaten by those feelings this time, which is when they come to see me. But they're like, if only I'd have had this when I was a kid, I could have stuck through. I might have got a lot further in tennis. In fact, I was travelling out to Croatia to do a triathlon last year. It was like 5 o'clock in the morning, and someone came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, is it Josie? And I was like, yeah, didn't recognise them at all. And they were like, so-and-so, we worked together, and it was before COVID. And I was like, no, you can't be, because you're still 13 in my head, and you now look like you're at university. She's like, yeah, I'm at university, and I'm still doing my sport, and I'm just off to this international competition. Wow. And it was so nice. And she was like, I'm still using all those tools we worked on when she was like 13, but now she was like this 19-year-old going off, competing for the UK at international comps. And it was so lovely to see that, yes, she'd learnt them all at 13 because of lots of fear, but had taken them the whole way through and kept somebody in their sport, rather than the many people that drop out because it feels too much and there's too many other things that feel easier to go and do instead.
Yeah, that's so incredible. Do you think the awareness is more now? Because I feel like when I was a teenager, I guess maybe these are very high-performing athletes representing the country, so they've got that support system, but I feel like I would never have heard of a sports psychologist when I was a teenager. So is it a bigger thing now?
I do a lot of mentoring of those who want to become sports psychologists. And so often I'm talking about that journey into it. And I was like, I couldn't have become a sports psychologist when I left school originally because it didn't exist. Okay. So no, it is much much more common now. I think if you're obviously a Paralympic or Olympic athlete, you will get a sports psychology as part of the package that you get from UKSI and kind of the NGBs. So that spreads awareness when people are talking about it. If you're up and coming and you're on a programme, I think it's called DICE at the moment, but they have a various number of programmes for like 16, 17-year-olds who are top 10 in their age for their event or their sport. They're often invited onto a programme called DICE. And with that, they'll have nutrition support. They'll have a sports psychologist who does workshops with them. He'll do one-to-ones. So if you're on kind of a performance pathway, you will often get much more exposure to sports psychology. And then, yeah, we do talk about it probably more in the media. Now it's easier. There's social media and people are talking on there all the time. So it does feel like there's much more exposure to this as a kind of a profession, which means people think to reach out.
It's such an underrated tool. I mean, we focus so much on training our bodies and then going to the gym and nutrition. And I think the brain's the most important muscle in running, because we both know you know you can do all the training in the world and then it can often be your mind that lets you down.
The amount of runners who say, I wish I could just leave my brain by the side of the road, because in training I'm awesome, but when it comes to a competition I'm overthinking everything. I can feel my body seizing up. When the threat system triggers and it's sending that adrenaline and cortisol around your body, first place it goes is your tummy, which is why the toilet queues at races are so long, because everybody's body wants to be lighter to escape this scary thing that we've imagined. So everybody
is that why?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So, I have a friend that always talks about, this was a big race. It was a 3-poo kind of morning. Too much information, but yes, totally get it. And actually, it's quite funny when you talk about that with athletes, the little bit of recognition in their face of like, oh, it's normal. It's really good, because it's just normalised something they're always a little bit worried about. So yes, your body wants to be light. I do work with some athletes that the stomach tension is so much they throw up, and they have to work very, very hard around that, because then they haven't got any fuel for the race they're about to do. But most of us just go to the toilet a lot before a race. The next bit is the heart rate and the breathing rate are faster, which makes us feel terribly uncomfortable. But it also triggers the threat system, which is looking out for those physiological changes. Then you've got back, shoulder muscles can get super tight. It's not so bad for us in running, particularly longer distance running, because we're not using our arms in the same way as some other sports. But if you want to watch it, watch Wimbledon, because tennis and golf, it matters a lot. And you watch Wimbledon, right? And you will watch Sue Barker, whoever's presenting, go up to the last British person who is still in at Wimbledon, and they'll be like, everyone hopes in the country are now behind you. You're going to be on centre court. The whole country, BBC One is showing you. Good luck. And you're like, great, because you've just triggered their entire threat system, and suddenly they really struggle to serve and everything's tight and tense. And then we get the senses that switch off. So really helpful to understand that's what might happen in your brain. Yeah. Because when you can control those elements differently, your body feels different, you relax, and you don't have such a big difference between how you are in training and then how you perform in competition. They feel more of the same.
Rose, did you know after the age of 30, you lose 1% of your body's collagen every year?
That is crazy. So I've already lost 2%, which is a huge amount to replenish, especially as I'm an endurance athlete.
Thankfully, Pillar Performance have released their collagen repair product, which has been specifically developed to address the most common tendon and ligament issues among endurance athletes.
Some things we've both struggled with, and so many runners struggle with: hamstring tendinopathy, Achilles tendinitis, shin splints. Collagen could really help you. And Pillar Performance's collagen repair has a clinically trialled collagen peptide, which specifically focuses on repairing those tendons. All you need is 1 scoop daily, and unlike a lot of collagen products which don't taste great, Pillars is completely flavourless, so you can even add it to your morning coffee.
It really is great, and if our listeners want to try it, they can head to pillarperformance.shop, or for North American customers, thefeed.com, and enter the code 5mileseasy for 15% off their first order.
Thanks to Pillar Performance for supporting this podcast and keeping us injury-free. What about that? We talked a little bit about it, the pain cave. And this was one thing that our listeners responded to. Of so many people really struggle when it gets hard not to give up. And you mentioned earlier about kind of embracing that pain. And interesting, it's actually one thing I've spoken about with my sports psychologist. In the marathon, it gets incredibly uncomfortable. Yeah. And one thing she said to me where the penny really just dropped was she was like, well, how would you feel if you got to the end of the race and like it hadn't hurt at all? Like, would you be happy about it? For some reason, that just absolutely stuck with me. And now I always think about it when it starts to hurt. Well, it's like, well, good, because that's how I want to feel at the end. But how do you help people deal with that problem of giving up when it gets hard? Your brain switches on and kind of goes into overdrive and thinks, I've got to stop.
One of the biggest things isn't actually psychology, it's nutrition. So I'm not a nutritionist and no one should follow my nutrition. But one of the biggest things that triggers our threat system is low blood sugar levels.
Interesting.
And being hungry. And you've heard the phrase hangry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
When we're hungry, like you get back from a long run and someone starts telling you something annoying. There's no like, oh, just tell me later, sweetie. It's like, because you're hungry and you're tired and you're thirsty. But it's probably because your blood sugar levels have dropped. So when our blood sugar levels drop, we are much more likely to trigger our threat system. And when you are running a marathon, you are really messing up your tummy. So you've probably not even slept well the night before, right? So you've woken up, you don't want to eat breakfast, you know you have to, so you've forced something down, but it felt really dry and horrible and there. And then you probably spend an hour running up and down on your tummy, pumping, and you get to a point where you know you're supposed to have a gel, but you just can't bear the thought of that stickiness or the sweetness or whatever. So you're like, I'll have it in a mile's time, and you put it off. And as soon as your blood sugar levels start to drop, so does your threat system. And at that point, your threat system's going, why are you doing this? This is a stupid thing to do. You could just quit right now. Look, you could just climb over those barriers. You could go home. If you're doing London, you even get free transport back to the end. Like, you've suddenly got all of these reasons in your head why it's a dumb thing to do. And so you are much more likely to stop. And I see it whether you're doing 400 metres through to summer spine, which is on at the moment, right? Or winter spine, even worse, because you've got physical threats when you're doing that too. But it's usually about an hour after or a while after you've stopped eating, your blood sugar levels dropped, your brain is much more likely to go, no, I'm not doing this anymore. People will then drop out, they will eat something. Immediately they're like, oh, why did I drop out? I feel absolutely fine. I could have done that. And they're infuriated with themselves. So I think the most important thing is actually to be incredibly strict with your nutrition plan, so that your blood sugar levels are much more balanced. You are less likely to flip out. You're much less likely to listen to that part of your brain.
That's such an interesting. Yeah, that does. When you say it, it makes so much sense. And the brain needs fuel just like our muscles. Well, your brain, it's just like cramping, right? But in a brain form.
Your brain's 3% of your body weight. It takes 20% of the fuel that you put in your body. Yeah. And what it mainly takes is glucose. So if you see it like in January, right? Everyone goes back to work in January and decides they're going on a diet or they're going to lose some weight or something. So they stop eating sugar and everybody's really grumpy. And you can see at any time when somebody's not fueled their brain effectively, that they flip the lid so much easier. It's really, think about our brain as a toddler. So if you spend any time with toddlers will get upset over the most irrational things. Like you've cut their sandwich into a triangle rather than a square. And then you try and work out the reasons why the toddler is upset. They're tired, they're confused, they don't really understand something, they can't communicate what they want properly, or they're hungry or tired. So you and you can do that with your own brain, going, what's going on here? But in running, most of the time, so we haven't fueled fully. Our brain is taking 20% of the fuel that we've put in, but we haven't given it enough fuel. And so we call it flipping the lid. And what we then want to do is get to know the part of our brain that flips the lid. So we talk about the threat system, but I work with athletes to give it a name. So we call it our safety seeker, because what your brain wants is to survive. It wants you to be safe. It wants you to stay in your comfort zone. And so it's going to do lots of things to keep you in your comfort zone. One of those is those physiological responses in your body. Other ones are, we see it in different sports, things like your behaviour changes. So you go fast and small because you want to get the hell away from where you are right now. This came up for me. My random hobby is adult gymnastics. It's so much fun, right? But I was doing this move which involved a cartwheel into falling back onto a mat. Oh. And my coach was like, you're scared of this, aren't you? And I was like, yes. And professional me wants to know, how can you tell? And he's like, she's gone small and fast. And you can see it when someone's nervous, we crunch up. We don't want to be there. And you watch it, particularly in sports like tennis. It's almost like they don't care whether they win or lose. They just want to get off the court as quick as possible. So we can start to spot our behaviours. And that's our safety seeker trying to keep us safe. small and fast. So often actually a power pose is really helpful, because being bigger reminds you that actually you're safe, and it helps take over. So simply changing your stance when you're feeling like that can be
Is that
helpful.
the same as like when people say just smile and that helps you?
Smiling's different.
Oh,
I'll
is
come
it?
to that
Okay.
one.
Okay, we'll wait.
And the other area is you get really negative head chatter. Your brain starts
Yeah.
giving you all the reasons why you shouldn't carry on, because it's like, this hurts, this is uncomfortable, you might not be able to do X right, you might put all this effort in and you might still fail in your goals. That would be awful. You have all of that. So the way I work is thinking about, name this safety seeker, let's get to know it, and let's talk to it. So it's kind of sitting with us rather than that fighting against us. Again, it's that acceptance thing. So mine's called Lazy Larry. He looks like Homer Simpson eating a pink donut. But it's really helpful to have that image in my mind.
Yeah.
And he tends to show up about 7 kilometres into a 10K race. So I will notice, but instead of going like, I should slow down or I should stop, this hurts, I can be like, this is Lazy Larry. Lazy Larry wants me to slow down. Lazy Larry wants me to stop. That's not who I want to be. So I can remind it of things that make me more confident. And I've run hundreds of 10K races. I can totally run for another 15 minutes. I will be fine. And I can remind it of my values. And as I talked about, that's wanting to make my daughter be braver, really. And I use that as a mantra. So I have make Hattie proud, make Hattie proud, make Hattie proud. And I will have an instructional mantra to improve my body stance so that I run better. So for somebody, it might be smile. That one can be very effective. I use chin up. If I lift my head up, shoulders go back, chest goes forward, you can't help but run faster. And it almost becomes the rhythm for running of like, head up, make her proud, head up, make her proud, head up, make her proud. You do that for a couple of minutes and you're back in the zone and you've got a bit further on. So really getting to know your safety seeker. And mine's because it wants me to be lazy. A lot of the perfectionists might have polyperfection or doubting Dorothy. It's because I've got a child, I always end up doing alliterative ones. But you can have any name you want. And then I'll say, well, what does this look like in your head? It's amazing what people come up with. So somebody might be like, oh, it looks like a fire alarm. Or mine looks like a giant frog that's got bright red fur. Having that image means it's not you talking yourself out of what you wanted to do. It's this little creature that desperately wants you to stay safe. And it loves you. It's just overreacting in a way that you don't need it to overreact, and is taking you away from the person that you want to be.
So is it about finding tools to almost distract yourself from listening to that creature?
It's having a conversation with the creature rather than trying to ignore it.
Okay.
And then doing some distraction too. Because a marathon, you're a lot faster than me. For me, a marathon is very boring because I'm out there for a long time and it's impossible to focus. Even the 2-hour marathon runners, you cannot focus for 2 hours. We have about 45 minutes of focus in us. So you have to choose when you're going to focus. But distraction can be very helpful. The thing with smiling is that they've tested this in labs where they've got runners on a treadmill to smile at certain points, and it reduces our perception of effort. So one of the theories on how we get more out of ourselves as athletes is that first we need to increase our motivation. So if I was to say to both of you, if you got a new PB in your next race, I would give you £1 million. I reckon you'd do it, unless you're both millionaires already. So
Pretty big incentive, yeah.
yeah. If it's a really big incentive, it will really, really help us do whatever it takes, and we can override a lot of the negative head chatter and anything else in our body to do it. But if I was to give you £2 million to do it, that's not going to double your motivation. So at some point, our motivation maxes out as to what is possible. At that point, we need to reduce perception of effort. We need to make what we're doing feel easier. So imagine you've been on a long run, it was really boring, but a really good podcast comes on that you suddenly get really into, it doesn't feel quite so hard. Yeah. Or you bump into a friend and suddenly you're chatting to somebody else and it doesn't feel so hard. Or your favourite track comes on, music-wise, and it feels a bit easier. So for something like marathons, we're constantly trying to look at what tools will reduce your perception of effort. And smiling apparently reduces our perception of effort. And there's another trick with it. So I often use the mantra, smile every mile. When you go past a mile marker, smile, makes you feel better. But there's some additional research they did on cyclists, where they put cyclists in a lab and they flashed up pictures of people's faces, but really, really quickly, so they didn't really know what they were seeing. the cyclists that saw smiley faces were able to carry on for longer than the cyclists who saw grumpy faces. So I like the idea, particularly say a big marathon. It's not just the fact that you're smiling at yourself. If you smile at spectators, they tend to smile back at you. So you get that double benefit of this is reducing my perception of effort, and I can either push harder or I can go further.
Is there something in there about the gratitude for it as well? Only because that's something I've noticed, and it's funny, actually my mantra, which is extremely cringy, but I'm going to say it, is smile if you want to go faster.
Yeah, excellent.
I don't know why, but smiling really helps me in a race, and it does just, it gets me out of, if I am going into a bit of a negative headspace, my rule is like, smile for 3 seconds and just force myself to do it.
Love it.
And it really flips me out of it. But London, this year, I was running by myself for the best part of the last 20k, which in a marathon is really, really hard. And I kind of hadn't expected it either, which made it worse. But my whole thing was, right, every single mile, I'm going to smile at the crowd and engage with them and see something in the crowd. You know, you go through all these incredible cheer zones and like actually appreciate it. And for me, what it did was made me so grateful for the people who had come out. And I mean, God, us Londoners are a grumpy bunch most of the time.
Oh, but not London Marathon Day.
You see the joy of humanity. It's like, God, where have these people been all these years? And it really made me grateful for that moment.
Totally.
Is that something that you talk about with your athletes in terms of recognising the gratitude for what you're doing?
I will ask lots of them to keep a gratitude list. I will often, if they're with somebody else, ask them to do a bedtime gratitude. So when they lie in bed at night with their partner, of like, today I'm grateful for this. It's a really nice connecting thing, but it helps you realise what you've done. And in fact, it was the last pillar in the 10 pillars of success. When I wrote the book, I wrote it for Audible during lockdown. And I'd done some work on a podcast before lockdown, which it was for London Marathon to get 5 people training. And I was doing all the sports psychology with them. And then a small pandemic hit and we never got to do London Marathon that year. So the podcast never really finished. But they asked me to then write a book on sports psychology. And I was like, I've got this idea. There are 10 pillars, I think, that really help us perform better in life. I don't just want to write it as a book. I want to interview somebody who lives each pillar. So we had Dame Kelly Holmes, did belonging, Damien Hall, did purpose, and I had to get Lucy Gossage to do the gratitude one because everything about her was just so much about that gratitude. And I was talking about kind of how do you train for an Ironman when you've just spent a day in a cancer ward, and she works with teenagers. She's an oncologist who works with teenagers who may well not make it. And she was like, and I have to try and fit my training in for Ironman racing at 8 o'clock at night in ring roads around Nottingham because it's the only place there is that's light enough to be able to do it. And she's like, I'm really grateful that I get to do that. And when she's talked about her spine win last year, it was like, I'm grateful that I'm privileged that I get to go out and have a body that allows me to do this. I used it last year. 2 years ago, I did Paris Marathon and I wasn't properly trained for it. And I looked at my watch on the start line, and you know when your Garmin flashes up and says, you're exhausted, take a rest day?
Yeah.
That's what it said. I was like, yay, I've got 42
Thanks,
kilometres
Garmin.
to run now. Thanks. And it was like, oh my goodness, what I'm about to do. And it was like, do you know what? I'm actually just really grateful I can afford to come to Paris and I get to stand on a start line and I get to try. And just repeating that, I'm grateful to be here, I'm grateful to be here. A lot of that helps you lean into that discomfort of going, at least I can, yes, it hurts, but at least my body works enough to allow me to hurt. So I kind of think whatever works for you, and try different mantras on. Often people are like, oh, I love this mantra from so-and-so. It's like, great, but it has to work for you. And often, it will come up a lot actually when Wimbledon happens. People talk about too much emotion in sport. I don't think you can have too much emotion in sport. I love emotion in sport. I don't know how you were crossing Tower Bridge.
Oh, yeah. Nearly cried.
Yeah. Every time I do London Marathon, I'm sobbing on Tower Bridge because it's the people, I think, and it's this is my city, and it's so lovely on Marathon Day, right? And Tower Bridge just emphasises London, and it's almost halfway, so you're like, I'm getting there. And I think we should use that emotion more. And I always think of emotion standing for energy in motion. So use the emotion in a good way for how do I use something that gets me going a little bit to push me harder. So if you can find a mantra that taps into that, it's not going to be one you've taken from somebody else, because it won't trigger the same thing in you that it triggered in them. But to really work out, maybe ask the question you guys ask at the start. What's your why? Right? If you can find your why, if running makes you smile, then that's a perfect mantra for you. So use your why to really find your emotion in why you run. It will help you in those moments when your brain's telling you this is a stupid thing to do.
Can it also help you in the moments where you are missing your A goal? And I guess this goes back to the process versus outcome, but I know it's something that, again, a lot of people messaged in to us about, was giving up because they'd missed the A goal, or whether that's training or racing, and it's a bit of a black and white situation. It's like, oh, well, that's off the table, so there's no point.
Totally. Which is why I give every athlete confidence boosting cards. And there's one of the boxes is goal. They are not allowed to write an outcome goal in there. They're not even allowed to write a performance goal in there. So we might work out in advance, if your outcome goal was to qualify for something, we would then look at what performance it might take. So, to qualify for a European Championships would require a 2:30 marathon. So that would be your performance goal. However, you can't control that, because you don't know what the weather's going to be like on the day. You don't know how many other people are going to be there. You don't know whether there's going to be proper pacing. You don't know whether your shoes are going to get banned the day before. There's all sorts of random elements that can impact our performance. So we break down what is it likely to take in process terms, inputs, to get a 2:30. These are all the things that become my goal for that race. And ideally, a mindset goal for the race. So often my goal for a race is to overcome Lazy Larry. It's to notice Lazy Larry and to quieten him down so I can still focus on what I want to do. But it might well be to push myself into discomfort. It might be to push hard through from 18 to 22 miles when I know that's where I find it toughest. So you will have a process goal that you can always do. So even if bits fail, so like, oh, I was rubbish at 18 miles, I didn't push through. Right, well, I can start at 19 miles. And we can do the same in training. We often call it no failure training. If a coach is going to set you need to do this at X heart rate or X speed. Well, sometimes you can't, because your body might be fighting off a bug that you never even know you got, because actually it was successful in fighting off the bug. Or you might have had a hideous day at work where the person that irritates everything out of you was sitting next to you all day at work, and you're just so wound up and tense. You're not going to be able to hit certain things in training. But if you have no failure training, which would be like an 8 out of 10 for effort for this section and a 9 out of 10 effort for this interval, well, you can't fail that, because you can always put the effort in.
Yeah, that's been a huge bit of mine. We've spoken about that before, is what you can control is doing my best on the day. And if you have that as a focus, you might not be feeling your best physically, and that means the purpose being not focusing on outcomes. So if you are focused on hitting times, well, you're not always going to achieve those, but you can control, am I trying my best?
Yeah.
And that's going to look different every single day, but doing that is then going to make you feel a sense of achievement.
And a lot of elite coaches that I've spoken to said they've stopped setting time goals for their runners in races, because actually it can hold you back. And sometimes you want to see what's possible.
Yeah.
There was a really lovely example in, I think it was when the World Championships in cycling were held up in Yorkshire, and one of the athletes took her power meter off her bike the night before the time trial. She's like, I don't want to know. I want to see what's possible. And she won by 45 seconds, which is a big chunk on a time trial.
And actually, if she saw that power meter, she might have
slowed
reined
down.
it back. Yeah, interesting.
So sometimes there are going to be races where it matters to us that we finish.
Yeah.
But sometimes it can be quite exciting to go, do you know what? Let's see. I might blow up. This might go horribly wrong, but it might not.
Yeah.
And then I actually see what's possible.
But that takes a lot of mental strength and discipline to, I guess, embrace the possibility of failure. And then if it does go wrong and you blow up, see it as more of a learning curve than...
But all of it should be a learning curve.
Yeah.
So
it's hard to see it that way sometimes, though, isn't it? When it doesn't work out and you're like, in your head, it's the end of the world.
But if every race has to be a win, you're never going to learn anything.
Yeah.
So I really love the athlete Dame Sarah Story. And I got to interview her for I Can, which is my book for teenagers. And I've been lucky enough to go out cycling with her in Lanzarote. And I'm always like, how do you get to be so good? I can't remember how many medals she's won at World, European, Olympic, Paralympic level, but we're in the 80s, I think. And she's like, well, I don't really like winning. I'm like, that's easy for you to say, right? Because you win
I've done
everything.
it so many times.
And she's like, yeah, but when you win, it's harder to learn. And I don't want to be the most winningest athlete. I want to be the best athlete I can be. And that's not necessarily against others. It's how can she get the absolute most out of herself? And she does that by constantly trying to learn. And it is easier to learn when you haven't won because you can see what other people might have done. So if you look at every race from what can I learn from this? What can I do differently to be better? And also, what did I do well? What do I need to stick with because this works for me? You're not judging every single race on the individual outcome of that race. You're judging it on how do I become a better runner? And that means you continually improve. You'll have down days, we all do, but it means you don't put so much tension on individual races. So you don't have that threat showing up. So you continue to run better.
And also not necessarily comparing yourself to others as much if you're just focusing on yourself, which I know is a big one. And I think that was one of the ones that people wrote into us is how can, you know, especially with social media and Strava, etc., you're seeing what everyone else is doing and it might seem amazing and you're comparing yourself, but how do we just focus on ourselves and get the most out of ourselves rather than comparing ourselves?
I did some research from when I did my qualifications on social tracking and exercise addiction and whether we're more likely to have risk of addiction to exercise if we use lots of technology. And one of the girls I interviewed for it said she'd been injured and she came back, she did her first 10-mile run along the river and it was beautiful. And it was like one of those Sunday mornings where you're like, even I would love being a runner on that Sunday morning. She said she got back and her watch updated to Strava and she checked it and she saw her brother had run further and her friends had run farther and she felt like an utter failure. And you were like, oh, the comparingness just sucks all the joy out of what we do. So I will always have my watch running, but often I'll put something over the top so I can't see it while I'm running because otherwise that just makes me feel rubbish in the moment when I've got a bad time. I will often ask athletes to run without their watch. And then remembering that comparingness often goes alongside perfectionism. There's 3 types of perfectionism. There's the setting incredibly high bar for yourself. There is setting an incredibly high bar for other people. So occasionally I see that in parents who are setting that bar for what they think their children should be doing and how they should be working. But the most common type is comparing ourselves to others. And so we put everybody else on this pedestal around us. And we're not taking into account their genetics or the fact they might not work. And so they've got loads of extra time to train or any of the other elements that go in. We are judging ourselves based on all these other factors that we don't even know what they are. So I will spend a lot of time helping people understand what they're brilliant at. And we do things like confidence banks, confidence jars of kind of really logging all the things you are awesome at so that you can remind yourself of those bits. And we work on our own goals and our own processes so we can be proud of the way we behaved or we acted in our races so we can make more and more time focused on us and less focused on other people. But it's definitely a journey.
I love that. It is. It's so hard. And the first thing I thought with your friend is that you always compare to someone who's done more. I mean, the reality is there are probably 50 people on her Strava that have done less than her that day. But you always look for the person who's done more, and that's the person you have to compare yourself against. And it is, I think with social media, it is tough, isn't it? You see the highlight reel.
Some people can use it funnily. So I've got a friend that always talks about every time someone overtakes me running, I assume they're only doing a short distance. And that's why I'm going slower. And I like that kind of, I'm catching myself noticing, comparing, but I'm going to spin it so that I'm the hero in this story. But yeah, we're all very, very different. But to have your own goals, and it can be hard in a running club. I see in my running club kind of the WhatsApp groups of everyone going off to do races together and all the comparison stuff can feel really hard. You need the autonomy, ironically, as another pillar in the book, of how do you feel autonomous? How do you have a choice and a voice over the races you do so that you can choose ones that work for you, that will bring you that enjoyment, that might have a really good reason for you doing them, so that you can move away from some of that comparison.
And help yourself feel successful. It kind of links back to what does success actually mean and make it something that you can achieve.
You don't want to do, like, If you're going to run hard, it's horrible. Like some of the sessions I've had where I've procrastinated all day in my running kit because I know it's a treadmill session and I'm there at 10 o'clock at night finally doing it in my garage because I've procrastinated because I was so scared of that session, right? You don't want to go through all of that and then still beat yourself up at the end because you didn't get a PB or because somebody who's got, I don't know, parents with Olympians and they've got given brilliant genes is beating you. You really want it to be, where am I right now? What's the journey I would like to get on to get there? How am I going to motivate myself to do it? What tools am I going to use? What behaviours do I want to have in place that will help me feel proud when I cross that finish line? And if I've done just half of that, amazing, then that's success.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, honestly, we wish we had more time to talk to you because there's so much more we'd love to go into, but it would be really interesting to know. Okay, so for any runners listening, what is one thing that they could try this week, implement as a mindset tool or technique that's going to help them with their training and racing?
I try some reframing. So trying to actively notice the unhelpful thoughts that show up in their head whilst they're running. So for me, it's always my watch will beep and I'll see it says a certain pace and I'll beat myself up. So it's like you catch yourself in it and then you actively practice reframing this. Not how do I lie to myself about it. So I'm not saying, oh, that's a brilliant time when it's not, but it's how do I reframe it in a good way that's helpful. So for me, it might be like, well, the only way I'm going to get faster at running is by running. And I'm running right now, so at least I'm doing the thing that I need to do. But anything, it's like catch the thought, pluck it out of the air and go, how do I actively want to reframe it? Because one of the good things about running is we've got a lot of time to think. So we can use that thinking time to practice some of these mental skills. And reframing in a helpful way is probably one of the best mental skills you can develop.
I love that. And I think it's something that we were saying earlier, we spend so much time training our bodies, but actually every run is an opportunity to train our minds. So use it.
I said to an athlete this week who was like, this is going to take ages to learn. I'm like, how often a week do you practice? I'm like, well, 4 times. I'm like, well, then you need to do this 4 times. And you've been practicing 4 times a week for 10 years. We're probably behind on our mental skills work. We need to practice things over again. We want as much of what we do to be habitual. We know on average it takes 66 days to build a habit, right? That means you'd need to be practicing this reframing every day for 2 months for it to start to become something more natural to you. But when it's natural, it's brilliant to have in your toolkit.
And makes it so much more enjoyable.
Totally.
Well, yeah, it's been so fascinating speaking to you. And as Steph said, we need to do a whole series on this because there are just so many things in that conversation that I would love to dive into more. But to wrap up, the question we ask all our guests is, what is your high five me moment? So a moment in your work or your own running that you would give yourself a big high five for.
I did Florence Marathon a long, long time ago. And it was one of those marathons where everyone's there to watch the elites and they all disappear inside by the time we get there. And it was long and it was boring. And my headphones buzzed. So I couldn't listen to music. There was something wrong with them and it was like, this is driving me insane. Oh, no. So it was one of those you had to just grit your teeth and get through. And I got a PB. And so it wasn't the PB necessarily. It was I gritted my teeth and did what I'd hoped for. And I think it was those 2 things coming together that was like, yeah, I'd now got a very soft spot for that race.
So your mindset got you the PB? Because it could have gone the other way. You could have been like, my headphones are broken. This is, the crowds aren't out. This is not my day. But your mindset got you the PB.
Did. And actually, it was before I was training as a sports psych. So
yeah,
that's
you're a natural to me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us, 5 Miles Easy.
See you next time.